This is Join Us in France, episode 553. 553. Bonjour, I'm Annie Sargent, and Join Us in France is the podcast where we take a conversational journey through the beauty, culture, and flavors of France. Today, I bring you a conversation with John and Sally Capets about their journey renting a boat on the Canal du Midi. We explore their unique experiences from navigating locks to dining canal-side and discover why a slow-paced boat trip can be an incredible, enriching travel adventure. I know many of you are thinking of doing a vacation like this one because there is something about being on the water that is good for the soul. So let's talk about it. This podcast runs on chocolatine, caffeine, and the support of lovely humans like you. You book itinerary consults, take my voice map tours, ride shotgun with me in my electric car, come to the boot camp, or slip me a few euros on Patreon, and I love you for it. If you want to keep me going and skip the ads, there's a link for that in the show notes. Head to joinusinfrance.com/boutique to purchase any of my services, and merci. If you want all the links and the full episode transcripts, you'll find that at joinusinfrance.com/episodes. And to subscribe to the newsletter, which contains a handy summary of the conversation with all the useful links, you can go to joinusinfrance.com/newsletter. For the magazine part of the podcast today, let's talk about the Tour de France. Always a wonderful event, and it's on right now. Bonjour, John and Sally Capets, and welcome to Join Us in France.
Bonjour, Annie.
Wonderful to have you. So, you had a great trip to France, perhaps not the only one. Maybe it's the last one of several.
We had been to France. We went on a trip with our family to Sardinia and Corsica a couple years ago and finished that portion of the trip with our family and then went off on our own, just the two of us, and traveled, rented a car and traveled in the south part of France and ended in Barcelona. And so that's pretty much what spurred us on to want to take this trip this past fall to back to France because we realized that number one, we'd probably tried to fit too much into a short period of time. We really wanted to spend more time in France. Another part of that was that we realized we made a mistake in ending in Barcelona because it just cost us a lot of money to do that, dropping the car, getting the car in France and dropping it in Barcelona.
Okay, so it's not that they were difficult to deal with, it's just that it was the extra cost.
Yes.
Right. Yeah, very easy to deal with on both ends, on the front end and the back end. But yeah, we spent really literally a few days in the south of France. And we knew immediately that we needed to come back. You know, it's a good trip when you're already saying, hey, let's plan a trip back before you're even done with this last trip. So we knew right away. But because we had, as Sally said, we tried to jam a lot into a few days, we knew that we wanted to come back and spend more time. And so today we'll focus on the canal segment of the trip. But that was the third leg of a three week trip that we started in the Alps and then spent a week there, spent a week in Roussillon to explore the Luberon and Provence region. And then this last week was on the canal boat.
Right, right. So this was the Canal du Midi.
Correct.
Correct.
So are you boat people?
I mean, yes and no. We owned our own boat here in North Carolina for, I guess, about 25 years and then decided, okay, we can put that, we're ready to get rid of the boat now. So we sold it. So we haven't had a boat in quite some time, but we have always enjoyed boating. Yeah.
We have, and we have a group of friends who we traveled with. We'll talk about that more perhaps, but we had begun bareboating in the Caribbean on sailboats. So all of us who were on this trip had been on, multiple bareboat trips, either together or separately. And so we had some familiarity with boating lifestyle, if you will, or boating travel, being in close quarters and, being self-sufficient, so to speak, for extended periods. And that was kind of the genesis of the idea for a canal boat trip. And, in France, I think the Canal du Midi is probably the most famous canal, at least for this type of a trip. And so that's where we started.
Right. So the Seine River also has quite a bit, and the Rhone also has some. There's plenty, but the Canal du Midi is one I'm more familiar with because I've seen boats on the canal.
Right.
So where did you start your trip, and how many people was it in this boat, and how did you select the boat?
Well, you probably need to answer the question about how you selected it.
Yeah. So in our bareboat experiences in the past, we had become familiar with Le Boat, which is a boat hire service. They have an excellent website. They have really good customer service, I would say. And so I began exploring the trip. I had kind of an amateur travel geek. And so I had planned the 3-week trip for our group and then just put it out there for anyone who might have an interest in joining us along the way. So we had a differing number of people along, for each trip. On the canal boat, we had 9 people.
Ooh, that's a lot.
It's a lot.
That's a lot.
It's a lot. And the boat, so just exploring the boat website, we came across this particular boat that had 5 ensuite cabins. And so we put it out there, and naturally we had people to come back and to fill each cabin. And this particular boat is about 15 meters long and about 4 meters wide. So it's a fairly large boat
For the Canal du Midi, but
for the Canal du Midi, right? So it's a large boat for that, and it's the largest boat that they offer. We were pretty happy with that decision. The boat, I think for any of your listeners, the boat offers actually have a sticker on the side of the boat that says "No experience needed and no license required."
mm.
So what they should just say in the middle is only credit cards are required. So
And the boats are all pretty, at least the ones that we saw on the portion of the canal that we did, were all pretty, like, beat up. They weren't, like, brand new, shiny looking boats. I don't know. They've all been in many accidents, let's say.
let's say well worn.
Yeah, clearly there were people without a lot of experience on those boats.
Correct.
Yeah. As you're traveling along this canal and you're going under the little, the bridges, and most of them are arched bridges, so they're not very big. So there's not a lot of wiggle room on either side of the boat as you go through. And so I think there's a lot of bumping that goes on as you pass under.
Did you bump anything?
Oh, yes. I mean, yeah, yeah, if you're gonna do this trip, you're gonna bump. Most of the boats have fenders down the entire sides of the boat. And when you're going through these structures, there's like 328 structures of some kind, either aqueducts or bridges or canal locks rather, tunnels. There's a lot of obstacles along the way.
Yeah.
So the boats are well protected from that, but they get pretty worn from the inexperienced travelers.
And you're also going at such a slow speed that it's not like, anyone ramming into you like at, full speed ahead. Cause I think they only go, what, like,
7 or 8 knots.
yeah, it's slow. You can ride your bike faster than those canal boats go.
Yeah. Before we move on from the boat, you also have a kitchen on board?
Full kitchen. There was a nice, I would call it a full size refrigerator, freezer. Yeah, it was very nice. So there's plenty of room for storing, refrigerated things. And then you had storage underneath the seats for dry goods. And so we did eat mostly, I would say the majority of our meal, breakfast and lunch was primarily on the boat. And even some of our dinners, because that was a whole other thing. Breakfast, that was just easier to do on boat. We would usually ride and get some, croissants or something like that. If there was a town nearby, we would get that sort of thing to have along with our breakfast. And then lunches, we ended up eating a lot of those on the boat because a lot of times with trying to get through the locks, we had a certain distance we kind of needed to cover every day. And a lot of times we were getting to a lock and you get there and the lock keepers all take a lunchtime. So they're not there from, I think it was 12 to 1 o'clock. So, we would just try to get to the lock, pull up, stop. We would like have our lunch while the lock keeper was having his lunch, and then we would move on when lunch was over.
Right, and there's sometimes a line, right, for the lock.
Correct.
And then dinners, there were a couple dinners that we had, probably about half and half, maybe. We had half the dinners off the boat. We probably would have had more dinners off the boat and more lunches, but there just weren't a lot of places that were open for us to do that, or there weren't, like, some of the places we ended up stopping, there just weren't any restaurants right there.
Right, and for 9 people, that's a big group for most small restaurants. So you didn't dock along a city every time necessarily, or a town or village even.
Correct.
That is
Yeah.
correct. Yeah, we didn't. There were, in fact, the very first night we were at the marina, so there was a restaurant there. The next night, I think we were at near a small village. We did eat out off the boat that night, but there were a couple times where just weren't near a village, or if there was one there, there wasn't a restaurant open, or we couldn't find one that could take us. That was a sizable group of 9 people.
So we were traveling in September, at the end of September. So, this is a bit of a shoulder season, right, for restaurateurs and holiday makers and so forth. So I think that was a bit of a challenge for us. A large group of 9 made it a little more difficult. And I would say the only time that we had communication issues in France were when we were on the phone. So face-to-face communications, no problem. I mean, you can use sign language at the very least or Google Translate. But when you're trying to make a reservation for the next town ahead for a group of 9 and sometimes you'll get a voice message, that we couldn't understand. We couldn't translate. And so you couldn't get on. If a person answered you, they might speak English or they might not. And so that was a bit of a challenge for us as Americans. But otherwise, people were friendly and very welcoming. So that wasn't really the issue. It was just more a matter of getting across what our needs were.
Yeah, it is true that in the southwest of France, some of these villages are not super touristy. Maybe in the middle of the summer, they hire some students who are younger and therefore more familiar with English. But in September, late September,
Yeah, not so much. Not so much. And, the Canal du Midi is right now is purely tourist. It's purely a tourist attraction. There's no commercial enterprises.
correct, not anymore.
Not anymore. And so, as a rule, we didn't have much trouble. But as you mentioned, we were in small towns and villages. We knew a little bit of French and we would use that as we could. And people were still, very friendly, very welcoming. That was never a problem in the face to face interaction.
Yeah, but making reservations for 9 people, I can tell.
Yeah, that's going to be a challenge. That's going to be a challenge anywhere you go. But we were willing to break up into groups too, but still, it was a challenge.
So you mentioned riding into the town sometimes. So you had bicycles on the boat?
Yeah, so we didn't have a bike for everyone. What we decided to do was, I think we had, was it 4 or 6 bikes? 4, we got 4 bikes. And so we just kind of took turns. Like we'd say, we had a duty roster. So everyone had sort of like jobs to do, and someone was going to be driving the boat that day, and someone else was going to cook breakfast, that sort of thing. And so if you didn't have any duties, like being on the lines or something like that, then, you might go off and ride your bike that day with a couple other people. And so, yeah, we did have bikes. They weren't the best bikes. I had one day that didn't want to turn right and had a hard time keeping air in the tire, but they didn't have gears. But it was pretty flat along the canal. There was one place where you and I were riding that day together, and we had a couple hills. In fact, that's when I realized I had a flat tire. We're going up a big hill, and it's like, wow, I know I'm going up a hill, but this is really difficult. And then I realized it's because I didn't have any air in the front tire. So,
But having bikes, I highly recommend because most of the towns are right along the canal. And for example, the second night we were out, we stopped in Colombiers. And the nice thing about the Canal du Midi, the boats will supply you with a stake and dock lines and a hammer, so a little sledgehammer. And you literally pull up to the bank, sledgehammer your stake into the bank, and then tie up. So Colombier, for example, I think they had a marina there, but we just stopped, found a really pretty place to stop along the canal near a bridge and walked over the bridge. And the restaurant was right along the canal. So you could see the boat from the restaurant. For the most part, most of the towns and villages along the way are right there. But then there are some we might have ridden few kilometers, one day to a patisserie, but, nothing too bad. As long as you had air in your tires, you were okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously it's a canal, so it's flat. But when you have to go over the bridges, it kind of gets a little steep for a minute and then back down.
Exactly. Where you encounter the hills is really at the locks more than anything, because the whole point of the lock is and we were going from south to north, like southeast to northwest. So, meaning we were going uphill the whole time. So, if you think about, the whole idea of the lock system and the whole point of the Canal du Midi in particular is a section of a longer canal that connect the Atlantic to the Mediterranean. So, you're starting at sea level at the Atlantic, you're ending at sea level at the Mediterranean, but you're going either uphill or downhill as you navigate across France. And the locks would, in our case, were lifting us up the entire time. We were always going uphill, if you will.
So where did you pick up the boat?
We picked it up in a little town or I guess the town's called Porterania. The port was called Port Casafiere.
Okay.
And it was, very southern area, almost on the Mediterranean near Cap d'Agde,
Uh-huh.
the beach there, famous beach. So not far from there. And we finished our trip in Castelnaudary and then went on to Toulouse.
Aha. And that took 7 days? You rented the boat for 7 days?
Yes, and that's a recommendation we had. We did about 150 miles section, not 150 miles.
Maybe 150 kilometers?
No, 150 kilometers yeah, I think that's right. And we did that in a week. And I think our recommendation to folks who are thinking about this would be to maybe cut that down a bit, because we found we were pushing constantly throughout the trip. There were a couple times when we stopped and said, okay, now we need to spend a little more time here. And Béziers was one place we spent a little extra time. And then Carcassonne, one of our favorite spots along the canal.
That was nice.
Absolutely amazing stop.
But we did feel a little rushed. When John was setting this up, he had talked to somebody and they said, "Oh, yeah, that's totally doable trip for that length of time." But I really think it was too much because we would have liked to have had a little more time to just sort of enjoy the towns along the way. So that would be one recommendation, is not try to fit so much into it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because, I mean, those boats go very, very slowly.
It goes slowly, and really the thing is, I mean, it's that, but it's also going through the locks, because how many locks did we go through?
63 locks.
So 63 locks. And the locks, going through the locks, it's not that time consuming, but what's time consuming is waiting your turn or having to wait an hour till the lock keeper comes back, or, that sort of thing. So it really does slow you down. And there were days where we had, I think, 15 or so locks that we went through on one day. You're not going very far because you're doing a lock and then you're waiting and you're going through another lock and you're waiting. And so there's a lot of waiting time.
Right. So you mentioned, because I asked you to rank your favorite things that you did on this trip. So visiting the La Cité de Carcassonne. So yes, that's very nice. And how far did you dock from the Cité?
Oh, we were right there. I mean, we were right there. We were on the canal, but like to walk up to the walled,
Yeah, the Citadel.
the citadel, it was probably like what, a mile or
Yeah, maybe a mile or so, 20-minute walk.
Okay. Okay.
In fact, we ended up walking that 3 times out and back, because when we arrived about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and we saw the city in the distance. And Sally and I immediately jumped off the boat, got the boat secure, jumped off the boat and walked into the Citadel. We absolutely fell in love with it, and then came back, had dinner, and then went back at night because we wanted to see it at night and experience it at nighttime.
with all our friends because they hadn't
Yeah.
they hadn't been up there yet.
Yeah, so that was the second time, and then the next morning, we walked back again. So we wanted to do one of the tours through the ramparts and what they call the turrets or whatever.
Chateau Comtal.
Yeah, it was.
I wish we would have had more time to spend doing that. Like, I could have spent an extra day in Carcassonne.
Really? That's interesting because typically I tell people, it takes most of a day, but by the time you get there, and perhaps you need 6 hours for Carcassonne, but you would have spent longer.
I would have. Yeah, we really enjoyed it. I think we did that tour the next morning when we woke up.
Was it a person guided tour or was it the self guided tour?
We did the self-guided.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I felt like we were kind of, rushing through that a little bit. I could have spent more time doing more reading and listening to, and reading the placards and going into I forget what the name of the place was where they had the artifacts. But
Yeah.
yeah, I just thought it was really interesting. Plus, there were so many cute little cafes and shops and things, and we really didn't take advantage of any of that. So,
Yeah, yeah.
And Andy, we had not experienced anything like that before. For folks in France, it's old hat, but this was the first time we had really experienced any kind of a medieval city of this magnitude.
Yeah.
We had seen that I'm a bit of a professional cycling fan, so I had seen, Carcassonne and the Tour de France, and,
Oh, sure.
but that was quite nice.
Yeah. And then the second thing you mentioned is the Fonsorane, the locks near Béziers. And those are kind of cool.
It was so cool, and it was as you're passing through the Fonceron locks, you're only going one direction at a time. What I mean by that is boats that are traveling up the canal are traveling together, and boats that are going to the south are going together. So you have a kind of a staggered time when you can do that. So we went through, it's probably 1 o'clock or so in the afternoon as we're going up the locks. And for people who don't know, these Fonceron locks are just an absolute incredible engineering feat. They were built back in the 1600s by Pierre Paul Riquet. At that time, there were a total of 8 chambers rising up about 75 feet, 21 or so meters. And it's absolutely an amazing thing to see and somewhat more amazing to experience as you're going through the locks. Sally and I, we mentioned having a duty roster. And on the duty roster, we would assign people to be on the boat or on the lock as you're passing through the lock. And of course, you had a helmsman, driving the boat. So a boat this size really took 5 people to get into and through a lock. Some of the smaller boats, we saw people going through with just 2 people on them, and that was fine for two, smaller boat.
Mm-hmm.
Still tricky. We would often help, fellow travelers, to grab the line for them or do whatever we could to help them. But as you're traveling through the lock, at the top of the lock is a visitor center. And I think it's one of the most visited attractions outside of probably Paris and other larger cities, but in the area, certainly. There were hundreds of people just kind of gathered and kind of chained off of the lock so they weren't interfering with people coming up the locks. You feel kind of a bit of like a rock star coming through these locks.
Yeah, everybody's looking at you. Yeah.
a tourist attraction, anyways. We were part of the tourist attraction.
Yes, yeah, we were the clowns, I think. But anyway, we tried not to mess up. And the lock keepers are very strict, so they have a chain behind which people are, tourists and spectators are supposed to watch. And so a a little boy came inside the chain and he was there with his mom and a couple of siblings. And I went over to him and said, "Do you want to help me with this lock?" And he said, "Yeah." So I handed him the line and basically just wrapping the line around a bollard, to kind of steady the boat as you're going through. I think he really enjoyed that.
Of course.
He got in a little trouble afterwards, but that's okay. He had a good experience, I think.
Elise and I went to Béziers and we saw the locks. We didn't go to the visitor center, but I mean, you do watch the people going up and oh, cool, there's people on the boats. Hello,
Yeah,
everybody waves.
yeah. And it was a beautiful day. It's a very beautiful sunny day, and I think it would maybe had, more people out that day as a result.
Yeah, you have a lot of people walking their dogs or
Yes.
kids families with kids in strollers. And it's a very popular place to go for a walk for locals.
That was the largest number of people we saw along the canal, except for maybe Carcassonne. There were a lot of people in Carcassonne.
And of course, at the bottom of the locks or near between the locks and Bezier, you have the aqueduct bridge, which is a bit of a tourist attraction too. So we did see a lot of people just walking along. It's just a beautiful section of the canal. And at the top of the lock, at the visitor center, we didn't have a lot of time. And Sally mentioned we were rushing a little bit through there, but we caught a little petite train tour, took us into Bezier.
Yes, it takes you all the way to the locks. That's right.
It does, takes you from the locks into town, and we really enjoyed that. Beziers being a bit of a bigger town, it was, there was obviously some very interesting parts to it, but not something we probably would have wanted to walk through too much. So we enjoyed that petite train for that. And it is maybe €8 a person, pretty inexpensive.
Yeah. And Les Halles in Béziers is very fun. Les Halles, where you eat, it's a very fun experience. Wonderful. Number 3 was dining canal side in Colombiers.
Colombiers. I mentioned that earlier where we had just staked up the boat. It's a gorgeous night and the sun setting. We had just a lovely dinner at Au Lavoir.
Au lavoir.
Au
Okay.
Lavoir. Beautiful, beautiful location there. Stopped, had some drinks. They were very accommodative of our large group and stuff.
Very
Yeah, we had
good.
very, very nice waitress. She was very friendly, and she Canadian, actually. I think she'd married a French guy and moved to France. Yeah.
So there was no language barrier there.
No, no, that was kinda nice, yeah.
Number four, you mentioned marveling at the ingenuity of the canal system with its many types of locks and the Malpas Tunnel. Tell me about the tunnel because I haven't seen that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's kinda interesting. Again, it's a very narrow tunnel and long so that when you go in there, you're not I guess you can see the light at the end of the tunnel, but it's kinda long, so it's dark in there. And so it's a little if I had been driving the boat, it would be intimidating for me because I'd be worried about bumping things the whole way through, but, yeah, that's an engineering feat also, and that's a day I think that was the day that you and I were riding our bikes. We had ridden ahead and gone to there was a little museum that talked about the building of that. And what's interesting is I think, if I remember correctly, there were like 4 different levels of tunnels, all for different purposes. So we had the tunnel that we were going through on the canal, but there's also what were the other ones, John?
Yeah, so, I mean, across the top of this Col de Maupas was the Roman road, which was built, BC times. And then you have the canal tunnel that Sally mentioned was built in the 1600s. And then there was a railway tunnel built in the 1800s. And then there was a drainage tunnel. And this was kind of the interesting one, built by monks, I think, back in the 1200s. And the drainage tunnel was designed to drain they call it the Etang de Montady, Montady.
Okay.
And very interesting area because this had been a lake or a pond, a very large pond, I guess, but maybe a small lake that was infested with mosquitoes and carried disease and so
Mm.
forth. And the monks who had a church nearby had petitioned to build this drainage tunnel back in the 1200s. So all four of these levels across this col, which is, I guess, is a small mountain
Yeah, col means it's the highest point of a hill or a mountain.
hill. Yeah. So it was, relatively small, but as Sally mentioned, the visitor center was
So they're
screened
all
all of them.
stacked. I mean, you have the drainage, you have the railway tunnel, you have the I don't remember which order they were in, the canal tunnel, and then you have the road above. So it was like all these different pathways through this mountain, but not, all one on top of the other. It was kind of fascinating. They had a diorama. I thought that's what I would call it, like a model of it in this little museum. So we spent some time in there and learned a little bit about that. That was cool. I thought that was fun.
Yeah.
At the top of that, by the visitor center, they had a stone structure that was very similar to Bory, the Borys over by
In the Luberon?
yeah, in Lubron.
Yeah.
So there's that Borys village,
Yeah.
and we went back haven't seen that. We went back and talked to the 2 ladies in the visitor center, spoke very little English, but we conveyed to them that this was like a Bory, and they didn't know anything about Borys, so we kinda showed them. They were delighted to see,
We had some
pictures
pictures.
we
Yeah.
had pictures of the Borys near what's the name of that town? Gourd,
Yeah,
yeah.
God, yeah.
So, but that was yeah, just incredible engineering, and we had fun with it.
Wonderful. Yeah. And you also saw some folk art at the Écluse de l'Aiguille?
Oh, yeah, that was a really interesting place. So I think the lock keeper was responsible for all this. It's basically like metal pieces of art. He just put together scrap metal into different, like, into people or machines or bikes, and some of them were mechanical. So I was surprised. We had come into this place for the night, and at the top of this lock where this art is, and we had seen it as we'd come up to the top of the lock, but we were busy getting the boat situated. And then at some point, everyone went off doing something. For some reason, I was left there kind of by myself. So I walked over to this artwork and I was by myself. And as I stepped in front of this one piece of art, it all of a sudden started moving. And it was like a guy on a bicycle or something. And I was like, oh my gosh, it just took me by surprise. I wasn't expecting anything to move or make noise or anything. Some of it's a little graphic, like,
R-rated.
yeah, maybe R rated. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah.
R-rated metal art?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
You'll have to look it up. You could probably find some pictures, but yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, look.
Yeah. Got your attention now.
Yeah.
But yeah, they had a motion sensor there, and a lot of the art was kind of stationary, folk art, I would call it, but, made with junk, basically,
Yeah.
scrap metals and junk, but very ingenious.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
some for sale, some for sale. We didn't buy any, but
You didn't buy any art.
no, not this time. So, again, that was the time we just pulled up next we went through a lock because we wanted to get through that lock so we'd have an early start in the morning. So we pulled up on the other side, drove a stake in the bank, and spent the night there. Absolutely gorgeous setting.
Yeah, that was so pretty.
Absolutely stunning, and a beautiful sunset.
What is it like sleeping on a small boat like that?
Well, you know, first I should probably describe I mean, I think we slept well, but I will say the cabins were some of the smallest, like, even though we've been on boats before, sailboats and so on, and usually the cabins are rather small, but this was very small. Like, when you walked in the room, the cabin of this boat, there was not room for 2 people to stand in that cabin, so, like, you could go in and if one person was in bed, the other person could go into the bathroom, but there was really only one room for one person to stand. So, putting away your luggage and that sort of thing was a little challenging with more than one person. But sleeping was not a problem. I mean, the beds were big enough.
Were they like queen size sort of beds?
No, they
It's
were probably more like a double. They weren't all the same either. There's some of the one room had like a little bit of a bigger bed in it, but
yeah, they were I would describe them as small twins pushed together.
Uh-huh.
Small in the US, we'd think of 2 twins being pushed together to make a king, but that wasn't the case here. It was to make maybe a full size, right?
okay, a couple of the cabins, it was kind of interesting the way it was set up because you wanted to sleep with your head facing towards the door because on the other end of the bed was sort of like a something that kind of hung down from the ceiling, like an overhang. You kind of had to like slip your feet underneath this thing. I mean, there were several feet of space. It wasn't coffin like to me or anything, but we did have one.
Right, but you don't want your head there.
Don't want your head there, but we did have one guy who we found out well, he found out also. He didn't realize he was claustrophobic, but he happened to be in one of those cabins with that overhang. Ours did not have that, but his cabin had that overhang, and he got up in the middle of the night, like, sort of in a panic. He was feeling claustrophobic. So he ended up switching cabins with another couple, and it was all okay, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and I would say too, these cabins, I mentioned they're en suite, so you had a bathroom that would have what they would call wet head, meaning that you would shower the toilet, just slip the toilet seat down and you would shower in around the toilet area and the sink area. So it was very, very small.
All in one.
It
Yeah.
was an all in one experience.
Kind of rustic.
It's very rustic.
Yeah, I would say more like glamping.
Yeah.
Yeah, glamour camping, glamping.
Yeah.
But if you've been on a boat before, you kind of expect that. Sally said 2 people couldn't stand in the cabin together at the same time.
Wow.
Pretty small.
In fact, that was just a kind of a thought reflection we had that if we were to do this again, we would have one more spare cabin than the number of crew that we needed. So if there were 4 couples, we would maybe use the 5 cabin boat. And that way we could store luggage in that last cabin.
Mhm.
Yeah, if you're two couples, I would get a 3 cabin boat.
We both had collapsible rolling duffels is what we had packed in. But I will say, and also we had a small rolling carry-on, but for the most part, our luggage was pretty collapsible. But even though it was, we could only fit one of our collapsible bags, I think, underneath the bed. There was a little bit of space that you could put your suitcase. And so that was kind of like, what are you going to do with your suitcases? It's not like you have a dresser in there. Like you have sort of like a shelf beside your bed and you can stow some of your stuff up there. And
Yeah, so it's very, very, very small. Like it sounds like
it is.
Yeah.
It is. And actually, we were sleeping with I think we had the small carry-on suitcase at the foot of my side of the bed.
nowhere to put it.
Nowhere else to
No
put
place
it.
to put it. Yeah, yeah. So you gotta be careful with what you pack in and how much you have and
Yeah.
I think some travelers will go, they'll do an out and back kind of a trip. We did a point to point. So if you were to go out and back, you could probably store luggage wherever you're starting and ending. In our case, we were starting at point A and finishing at point B, so we didn't have that luxury.
Yeah, you had to have your stuff with you.
Exactly.
Interesting. You mentioned that Pont Canal sur l'Orbe. So tell me about that. I don't know anything about that.
Well, that's just I think that's the French name for that canal aqueduct right outside of Béziers.
Ah,
And that's prior to this trip, we had seen videos of people transiting France in canal boats, or in some cases, a sailboat. This just kind of really intrigued us that you could have a canal on a bridge passing over a river. That was really special. And it was incredible. It was built in late, I think, mid 1800s, and, wasn't leaking as far as I could tell. It's holding water just fine. Yeah, it was just pretty incredible.
Yeah.
oh, they were probably maintenance.
We don't have anything like that here in the United
Absolutely.
States.
No, well, no. You wouldn't do it that way nowadays, Yeah. And you also mentioned that you liked sightseeing in Toulouse, but by then you were off the boat, right?
Correct. Yes.
When you got off, you must have felt like any hotel room was like, oh, this is a palace.
It was luxurious. Yeah. It was very nice.
Particularly the showers.
Oh, yeah. I took the longest shower that night. Like, I don't know. I thought I was never gonna come out. It
Yeah.
was
Well, I mean, showering over the toilet? Ah, no. No,
Yeah.
this is not happening.
So Toulouse wasn't really on our radar because we were focused on the canal boat part of the trip. We finished in Castle Notary, which it's a nice town. Wasn't particularly special, but it was a very nice town.
It's all right.
And so we took the train from Castle Notary to Toulouse. And when we arrived in Toulouse, actually a little bit before we arrived there, we had done a little bit of research. And I think you actually sent me a voice map, maybe Elise's or yours. I'm not sure whose.
Elise, yeah.
Yeah. But when we arrived in Toulouse, it was a beautiful day and we loved Toulouse.
oh, yeah. It was great. I liked it a
Yeah.
lot.
I had no idea, didn't know what to expect, and learned later it was like the fourth largest city in France. And it was fabulous. We had a really great time exploring Toulouse.
We did a little bus tour there too.
We did a petite train tour.
Sucker for a petite train tour. I just think it's a good way to get an overview of the town.
It is.
You see a lot in a short period of time
Yeah.
for cheap, for a few euros. So then we could come back and revisit wherever we wanted to see.
So how much time did you spend in Toulouse? With one night, 2 nights?
Oh, just one night. We got in maybe like around noontime or late morning, I think. And so we were there to have lunch. We had lunch and spent the afternoon. And then we were leaving the next morning on a plane. So I guess we Ubered to the hotel. It was near the airport. We just had dinner there at the hotel, which was probably a mistake. We should have had dinner in Toulouse and then gone to the hotel because it was
There's not much there.
well, there was a restaurant, but they had something that I think they had an event going on. So they had a large party coming in. And so we kind of had to talk our way into getting a place there to eat. Only some of us did. The rest of them were kind of, I don't know what they did for dinner that night, but
Two things I would say about the end of our trip is when we got off the train, we just stored our luggage at a nearby hotel. Spent a couple euros. They held our luggage for us. It was secure. And off we went.
we got that recommendation from Annie.
Yeah, so we stored the luggage. Others in our group, they taxied immediately to the hotel and dropped luggage and came back, but didn't think that was really necessary. But the other thing is for us, I like to push the easy button on travel. And so for the last night of a trip, I really like staying at an airport hotel. And by airport, I mean a hotel in the airport. So in Toulouse, you may know there's a really nice hotel that you literally walk out of reception into the airport concourse.
Which one is that?
I think was it called the N Hotel, or I'm trying to think what it was called.
I have never done that. I mean, not in Toulouse. I've done that in other cities.
Yeah, you probably don't need to in Toulouse. You're home by then.
No, no, I don't.
But that was I think, a really good thing because we had an early morning flight and we literally got up, had a croissant or some breakfast, and then walked into the concourse.
Yeah, I think we were leaving the hotel like 4:30 or 5 o'clock in the morning. It was very early, so it was nice not to have to travel.
Yeah, the flights out of Toulouse to get to Paris and then to the US are brutally early. You have to get up really early. And so what we do anymore is we leave from Barcelona because the flights leave from there at 3 or something. And I have an apartment not far. So Just go down to Barcelona and then take the bus into the airport and take off by 3, which is quite easy to do.
Easy.
Or we fly to if we're flying to through Amsterdam, we fly the night before and spend the night in Amsterdam and then take the flight to the US. Because it is, I mean, those super early departure times.
Pretty brutal. It's already difficult traveling and flying, across the pond. But so our flight was from Toulouse to Munich, from Munich, and then Munich to Charlotte, Charlotte, North Carolina area. So it worked out pretty well.
So, okay. So, overall, with a boat trip, I mean, I've heard people say it's awfully slow. So, it's like hurry up and wait kind of deal because you need to be there all the time to mind the boat, don't you?
Well, I mean, there were a couple times we all got off the boat and went to a restaurant, but yeah, there were a couple of people in our group that were a little nervous about that. But
I wanted to ask you about that. Like, do you lock your stuff? Do you have a lot? Well, you didn't bring very much, but
yeah, we didn't really have valuables, but we did. There was a way to lock the door on the boat. The bikes were out on the deck, but they were kind of locked to the railing. And I don't think anyone would want to steal them anyways because they weren't that great of bikes. But I think they do sometimes get stolen. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. John and I felt pretty comfortable with it, and we didn't have any issues, luckily, with anything getting stolen. But I guess that is a thing that can happen.
why did you ever think, like, what if somebody hops on the boat in the middle of the night?
No, I didn't think about that.
Didn't worry about that.
The only
Mhm.
place that I might have wondered about something like that happened was in near Carcassonne because there were some homeless people. It looked like maybe they were homeless people nearby. Like it seemed like where we were tied up or, stayed for the night there were like park benches, kind of like a little bit of a park area right there next to the canal. And maybe some people looked a little, iffy.
But there were 9 of you, so you didn't ever feel.
And we actually asked there was a boat right behind us, I think. Someone had struck up a conversation with the guy in the boat, and we asked them, were they going to be around that evening? And they said they were. And we asked if they could just kind of keep an eye out on our boat while we were out to dinner. So, yeah, it all worked out. That worked out fine.
I think boaters tend to be kind of look after one another. Everyone's kind of in the same situation. So they know what the needs are and where to help if they can.
Were there mostly English speakers on the.
On other boats,
Yeah.
mostly I would say they were not English speakers. They English speaking, but maybe not. We saw, maybe some Germans, Dutch, a few French, I'm sure.
Well, I mean, I would say a lot of them couldn't
Yeah.
communicate with us. I mean, you weren't always sure you were getting the full meaning, but, we got by. Back to your original question about it, overall impression, I thought it was a really fun thing to do. I don't like to do a lot of things twice because there's so many places to go in the world. I don't like to, do the same thing over and over again, but I would recommend someone doing it with maybe some recommendations to try and maybe travel less distance on the trip. So you're not rushing through it as much. I wish we could have done that. And then also, have more space by having that extra cabin. So you have a place to put your things.
Yeah, perhaps not 9 people. That's a lot of people.
There was a lot of people. Yeah, we did run across several people who would say, "Oh, how are you traveling with it?" When we would tell people that 9 people on our boat, they just about wanted to fall over. But no, I mean, we're all still friends. So that's good. We just got together with 8 of the other people the other day. So yeah, we're all still friends. So it was a little challenging at times just because you're in close quarters. Even walking through the galley area where the kitchen is, it's like, oh, someone has to step over so you can walk through. And then, it's kind of like a Tetris game and walking through the galley. But it all worked out okay. I think everyone enjoyed it. I think the thing that made it challenging was the space being kind of confined at times, with that number of people.
Yeah, and I think what added to that was the weather. So it was pretty cool. Late September, it's pretty cool to be out at night. And probably more than the temperature was the wind.
The wind, it was very windy, which I guess is pretty typical for that area of the country.
When we were in Provence, we had incredible winds traveling through there. And it
Yeah.
really kept us indoors more than we would have liked to.
Very windy there too, yeah, it was very windy in Provence. That kinda just tires you out after a while, the wind, when you're in it.
But, what made it enjoyable though, Annie, you talked about it is a slow boat, and that's kind of the point of it, is taking a little bit of a breather and relaxing and reading a book. Sally likes to journal, just different things, enjoying nice glass of wine as the sun's going down. I think it's what is part of that experience,
Yeah.
slowing down.
I mean, I think you would say the same thing. I was never bored at all the entire time. Never bored. I thought it was a really fun trip, and it was just like I said, I wish we coulda had more time in some of the places, which, would be taking it a little bit slower even. Not so much in terms of the speed of the travel, but just
How far you wanted to get.
yeah.
So instead of getting all the way to Castelnaudary, maybe you would have stopped in Carcassonne or.
And you're somewhat limited by the bases of the operations too. So you have to keep that in mind when you're planning. But I would say if you were traveling in the summer in more of a high season, it could be difficult to make that 7-day journey that we made just because of queuing up ahead of the locks and, maybe waiting to pass through bridges and tunnel or whatever it may be.
One last question. Who would you say this type of activity is best for? I mean, probably not people in their teens or 20s, but maybe mature adults, maybe for little kids. I don't know. Could it be dangerous? Like,
Being a really fun trip for like mom, dad, and a couple kids, few kids. That would be, I think, a really fun trip.
hmm
Although they're real little, like you're not going to get in that water in a canal. And if it's the summertime, yeah, I mean
that's a terrible idea. Don't.
no, no, it's not healthy. I don't think, but I think that could be a fun family trip.
I think fun family trip or, group like our group, we're 60 somethings, but I would say group of 30 somethings, 40 somethings, any type of group activity like that, a smaller group.
Was there like a big table where you could all sit and eat?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So there was a table with like sort of a bench seat along three sides, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Both indoor and outdoor. So topside, there was a very large table and we had a canopy there that we could put up or down.
And we would eat up there sometimes, but it was so windy. I noted in my journal that, like, one day, one of my friends had her olives blow off the plate, you know?
Wow.
Yeah, it was very windy.
It's olive blowing day. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
But yeah, I think for us, we've seen YouTubers or what have you, they've done multiple trips and multiple locations. So for us, I think the Canal du Midi is a one and done, but maybe other canals, we might consider doing that. Our preference is to be more active kind of individual travel as opposed to like large group riverboat or, cruise ship type of travel. So we like exploring on our own. And so this really affords people who want to do that a great opportunity, I think.
Wonderful. Well, we're going to have to stop here because we've been talking a long time, but it's wonderful because I don't think we have had very many conversations about canal, especially the Canal du Midi. I mean, we talked about people who bike on it and things like that, but not so much spending a week on it. So thank you so much for talking to me on this.
Oh, you're welcome.
Welcome. Our pleasure. And thank you too. I can't tell you how many podcasts I listen to prepare.
Oh, yeah, lots.
So, but we really appreciate what you're doing as well. And not just what you're doing, but the way that you do it and I love your sense of humor, but also the kind of commercial aspect and, how you approach the podcast. So thank you for doing that too.
Thank you very much. And I wish you many happy trips to France.
All right.
Merci
Thank
beaucoup.
you.
Merci. Au revoir.
Bye-bye.
Again, I want to thank my patrons for giving back and supporting the show. Patrons get several exclusive rewards for doing that. You can see them at patreon.com/join us. That's Patreon. Join us, no spaces or dashes. And a special shout out this week to my new Join Us in France champions, D, Joanne Tenzer, and Katie Hall. And thank you, Kathy, for editing your pledge up. Would you join them too? You can do it for as little as $3 a month, but if you can afford it, I would love to have you pledge a little more so you can have access to more of the rewards, such as the Zoom meetings, the monthly Zoom meetings. Go to patreon.com/join us. And to support Elise, go to patreon.com/Elise Art, ELYSART. So 2 Sundays ago, I had my Zoom meetings with patrons, which is I think, my favorite Patreon rewards. We get to hang out and chat about your plans. You get to ask me pretty much anything. And very often, these patrons will also meet me in person, either at the boot camp or on a day trip with me, etc. So, it feels like they're real friends. It's fantastic. The next dates are going to be July 26 and 27. And there's a Saturday 6 p.m. meeting, a 9 a.m. Sunday meeting. That one usually works out great for the folks in the Pacific, or my favorite night owl, Christy, from the Central Time Zone in the US, and also Sunday night, 7 p.m. France time. You need to decide which one works best for you. And our small Aussie/New Zealand group is growing as well, so that's wonderful. Let me read a few reviews of my voice map tours this week, and also tell you about one that I didn't like so much. Anyway, here's the good ones. About the Latin Quarter. The tour was structured well and had precise instructions. The experience seemed very close to having a real guide. I'm a real person, I swear. I like that it was self-paced, which allowed us to stop at interesting locations for pictures, art, coffee, etc. Another person wrote, a wonderful introduction to the Marais. We would not have seen a majority of the places Annie brought us to. I'm thankful we had Annie in our pocket. Thank you very much. So another one again. This is the third tour of Annie's, which we've enjoyed from home. So this is Montmartre. It brought back fond memories of Montmartre and answered questions I didn't remember that I had. It also made me eager to climb the hill again. She's a gifted storyteller who doesn't overwhelm you with info. She sets a good pace. I enjoyed it very much. All right. Yeah, he enjoys it from home, and why not? You can enjoy those tours anywhere you want. About my Saint-Germain-des-Prés tour, we enjoyed Annie's tour. It was great being able to take the tour at our convenience. We appreciated her tips on places to stop along the way. Now, the one that made me unhappy, and there's one of those every now and then as a reality, one person kind of trashed my food tour around the Halles a few days ago because many stores were closed and they got hangry. I had to look it up. I didn't know what it was. I don't like it when people have a bad experience with one of my voice map tours. However, it says right in the tour description that it's best not to take this tour on a Sunday afternoon or Monday all day because many stores are closed. And these people showed up hungry and then hangry on a Sunday afternoon. And they took it out on me in the comment section. I know most of you don't need this reminder, but perhaps a few do, so here I go. French stores do close, especially mom and pop food stores. I know many of you are used to very long hours from all sorts of stores, but it's not that way in France, not even in Paris. When in France, you should not expect people to work nonstop. And you can't expect them to hire a slew of poorly paid workers who get no health insurance and no benefits of any sort, because we don't do that in France either. Also, please read the tour description before you take it. There's a lot of important information in there. Podcast listeners get a big discount for buying these tours from my website. It's best for me as well because I get more of what you pay instead of giving it to Apple or Google. But if you buy from my boutique, it's not instant like it would be if you bought from VoiceMap directly. Give it a day or two, please. To use your code, open VoiceMap, tap on tour codes at the bottom right, enter the code, and download the tour. You don't have to use your tour credit immediately. It just sits in your account until you're ready. And if you're planning a trip to France and you want some expert help, you can hire me as your itinerary consultant. It's busy season, so book early at joinusinfrance.com/boutique. Usually you have openings within a month. Right now, it's more like 2 or 3 months. It just depends. Sometimes you luck out, but don't wait too much is what I'm trying to say. The Tour de France 2025 started yesterday on July 5th, 2025. That's if you listen to this episode as soon as it comes out, of course. The tour set off yesterday from Lille. Some of us cheer the racers on roadside, and some of us follow it on TV with a coffee in hand, especially if you're from the US, because it would be shown in the morning where you are. This event is so much fun. This year, the route will start in Lille, then Normandy and Brittany, the Loire Valley, the Mont d'Or in the center of France, Toulouse, my hometown, on July 15th, lots of days in the Pyrenees, including Luchon-sur-Bagnères, which just got their train service back last week, by the way. That was a big deal for this small town. Carcassonne on July 20th, Montpellier, and the Mont Ventoux. And this one is a doozy. But then they go on to the Alps and Courchevel, Albertville, Pontarlier on the border with Switzerland before heading to Paris on July 27th. We'll get to see aerial views of chateaux, sunflower fields, coastal roads, medieval villages as the riders push through long days in the saddle. Even if you're not a cyclist, the Tour de France is a wonderful way to see the beauty of France, and it might just inspire your next trip. And let's be honest, it's a lot easier to watch from your sofa than to pedal up the Mont Ventoux. And those drones that they use give the most amazing footage. So I turn on my TV in the afternoon in France, that's when it usually takes place, and enjoy as much of it as I can, and I hope you do too. My thanks to podcast editors Anne and Christian Codovan, who produced the transcripts. Next week on the podcast, an episode that I really enjoyed recording, and I hope you'll enjoy listening to it just as much as I did. We called it In Search of the Southwest of France with Catherine Macmillan. She was so much fun and shares so many wonderful tips. So join me next Sunday for that. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you join me next time so we can look around France together. Au revoir. The Join Us in France Travel Podcast is written, hosted, and produced by Annie Sargent and copyright 2025 by Addicted to France. It is released under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license.